In Peru, there are ancient buildings which defy modern technology. How could inhabitants of ancient Peru build these wonders without having any modern know-how? They did provide an answer. They believed that gods transmitted their knowledge. The heritage of an evolved civilization with an extraordinary technology, today forgotten. More than a century has passed since the first finding, but the gusty winds of the Paracas Peninsula, about 250 kilometers south of Lima, have not removed traces of the giant drawing carved in the sand. It is called the Paracas Trident or Candelabrum. It seems that it was created by the Paracas culture, who inhabited this region between 300 BC and 200 AD. But this is just conjecture. In fact, the few stories which do mention it don't reveal the authors, and neither do they indicate its date of creation. No analyses are available to date a simple excavation in the sand, and no organic finds nearby were unearthed, like clothing, tools, or other finds, crucial for carbon-14 dating, which are normally associated with a place to define a more or less accurate date. Even its significance is uncertain. It was conjectured that it could be a sign pointing towards areas of the ancient empire like Cusco, Machu Picchu or Nazca. But when checked, it appeared that its central axis extends and ends directly in the Pacific Ocean. Others have conjectured that it could be a religious symbol, perhaps the Tree of Life, or the representation on Earth of a constellation, perhaps the Southern Cross. In any case, the almost 200 meters of the central vertical axis, the nearly 120 meters of the horizontal axis, and the 40-degree inclination seem devised to make it visible from a great distance. A signal, therefore, a sort of lighthouse. Arriving from the sea, in fact, it starts to be seen even more than 15 kilometers from the coastline. But arriving from the sky, it can be seen even sooner. According to research by Professor Zechariah Sitchin, one of the world's greatest scholars on Sumerian cuneiform writing and an expert on ancient civilizations, the symbol represents Viracocha and marks the point where the areas visited by the ancient gods start. A higher entity, the head of a population who could glide over water and fly, worshipped with different names throughout Central and Southern America, who had restored civilization after the Great Flood. Viracocha, however, did not resemble the people who inhabited the continent at the time. He did not have dark skin and wasn't clean-shaven, but was rather white-skinned and had a beard. Could he have been the survivor of an ancient, evolved civilization, today forgotten, who had escaped a worldwide catastrophe? The head of a small group with a technology not understood by those ancient populations. The ancient Paracas population lived around the Candelabrum area and were simple and peaceful people. They survived on fishing and rudimentary agriculture. They were skilled weavers and created beautiful painted ceramic ware. This lifestyle, however, is in sharp contrast to the practice they are mostly known for: drilling and deforming skulls. Deforming was achieved by wrapping the head of newborns with bandages or wooden boards, which compressed the bones of the skull to make them grow abnormally. This custom must have caused much pain. Nevertheless, it was practiced for an extremely long time, and it also spread to more distant lands like Egypt, Malta, and Central America. Ancient deformed skulls dating back more than 6,000 years were found in these areas. Today, the true reason behind this custom has yet to be discovered. Aesthetic reasons do not seem to justify its use, and the fact that it spread to civilizations which had no direct contact renders its expansion even more unfathomable. Other populations too practice deformities which today are considered abhorrent, like the Mayan custom to induce strabismus, or the Chinese to deform women's feet. But these habits have remained confined to those cultures without spreading to other populations like skull deformation has. This deformity was also considered a distinctive sign and performed only within the highest ranks. The Viracocha representations which have come down to us depict a being with a stocky bust, short legs, and especially big head. Could it be that deforming skulls was a way to resemble the gods? Ica is a town south of Lima. Its small museum holds an unsolved archaeological mystery. Dr. Javier Cabrera Darquea was a doctor in the small town of Ica, loved and respected by the people all the more because he was a descendant of the city founders. He progressively transformed his doctor's surgery into a museum. Today, the 3 rooms hosting the museum hold about 11,000 stones, which weigh from a few grams to 500 kilos. These are carbonized andesites of volcanic origin and date back to the Mesozoic era. There are several incisions on their surface. The story starts in 1966, when a friend gave Cabrera a stone with the drawing of a prehistoric animal engraved. He discovered that it had been found next to the Ocukanje Desert and that there were many more. The stones had also generated some trading. In fact, the farmers would collect the stones and sell them to tourists as souvenirs. They told him that the stones had been brought to light in 1960 after the flooding of the Rio Ica. Cabrera was thunderstruck. Thereafter, the Peruvian doctor started to collect and study these stones with passion, a mission he pursued until his death in 2001. As he continued in his research, the doctor was increasingly convinced that the drawings carved on the stones were not just simple artistic creations, but some sort of ideographic writing. The images, in fact, were subdivided by Cabrera into subjects and illustrate the complex knowledge of more or less familiar subjects like astronomy and geography, but also more unusual, like surgery. The stones can therefore be rightfully considered as pages of a vast library. Their surfaces depict representations of body parts, heart transplants, maps of the entire planet which reveal how continents were millions of years ago, astronomers who study the passage of heavenly bodies, wagons drawn by horses, kangaroos, men with dinosaurs. But if dinosaurs became extinct 65 million years ago, and it is thought that man's appearance on Earth only dates back a few million years ago, how can it be that they are depicted together on these stones? It is difficult to imagine that this civilization had reached the degree of knowledge represented in these scenes during such a distant era. Anatomy, in fact, was only born in the 1400s, while the first heart transplant only dates back to 1967. The knowledge that the Earth is round only goes back a few centuries BC. And the use of the telescope for astronomic studies is owed to Galileo Galilei in the 1600s. Horses became extinct thousands of years before they were reintroduced by the Spanish to the Americas in the 1500s. And the ancient inhabitants of Peru never used the wheel, while the pre-Columbian populations certainly did not know what kangaroos were. Are we faced with the greatest archaeological discovery of our times, or with a resounding fraud? Various archaeologists believe these are counterfeits, mainly created by a couple of campesinos to sell them to tourists. And this theory needs to take into account the following data. It is estimated that between the Cabrera finds, those owned by Peruvian collectors and those taken abroad, the amount of carved stones amounts to over 50,000 pieces. Now, that's an enormous amount, even for a tireless couple of forgers. In addition, many stones weigh several hundred kilograms. Why create such cumbersome souvenirs so hard to sell? And it is really hard to believe that two campesinos, barely able to read and write, could ever have acquired the scientific knowledge carved on the stones. The reporter Juan de Santa Cruz Pachacuti Yanqui, in an article of the 1500s, reports that the Incas would call them manco stones, meaning power stones, and these were part of the funerary vestiges of noble families based on an ancient tradition. This is confirmed by the fact that in August 1966, several samples were found in pre-Incaic tombs by the president of Lima's Polytechnic Institute, Mr. Santiago Agurto Calvo, and by the archaeologist Alejandro Petzia of the National Institute of Archaeology in Peru. The news appeared in December of the same year in the scientific supplement of a Lima daily newspaper. But the most sensational scientific fact derives from the lab analysis on the stones. Cabrera had them analyzed by the mining engineering company Mauricio Oschild and by the Mineralogy and Petrography Institute of Bonn University in Germany. Based on the oxidation layer which covers the engravings, it seems that the stones were engraved at least 12,000 years ago. The Lima Aeronautic Museum, which owns about 60 samples, had the analysis repeated, and the data were confirmed. The engravings are at least 12,000 years old. Obviously, these are not the millions of years which can be surmised from the scenes with men and dinosaurs living together, yet even 12,000 years ago, dinosaurs were already extinct, and we know of no civilizations of the time which had such advanced knowledge. According to Cabrera, this culture, which he called glyptolic civilization, disappeared due to a planet catastrophe caused by the wrong use of their own technology. Could they perhaps be survivors who created their engravings to hand down their knowledge and history to generations to come? It is also true that farmers can realize imitations, and there are many, but these are easy to unmask with tests. That's why the Ica stones remain an archaeological mystery with their fantastic representations. Brain transplants. Pyramid systems to transform solar energy and distribute it for use. Flying machines resembling strange mechanical birds. But human flight is one of the greatest breakthroughs of the modern age. Only some time ago, it was believed an impossible feat. And the use of the sun as a source of energy is also a recent victory. Who is this unknown population which emerges from the chasm of time with this sophisticated knowledge? The aspect of glyptolic men incredibly resembles the Viracocha depictions, especially the one found on the door of the sun in Tiahuanaco, on the shores of the Titicaca Lake in Bolivia. In fact, there's a man with stumpy legs, large belly and large head, out of proportion to his body. the same physical makeup of the glyptolic men. After all, Ica is next to the Candelabrum area inhabited by the Paracas, and in order to best underline their affiliation to the noble classes, they would deform skulls, perhaps to resemble the ancient Viracochas. The Paracas also perforated skulls, and on the Ica stones, the glyptolic men are depicted performing brain surgery. And yet, on the Paracas Peninsula, there's the Candelabrum, which, according to Zechariah Sitchin, indicates the beginning of the areas where Viracocha had lived with his group. And Ica is also next to the Nazca Plain, where there are large drawings only visible from the sky. Drawings which we find engraved in the Ica stones. Is this only a casual coincidence? Perhaps the Nazca Plain could add other elements to this research. The Pan-American Sur cuts through the vast Nazca Desert Plain with its drawings, which have engaged researchers from around the world in the attempt to explain the mystery, like a dark gash. The stretch between kilometer 419 and 465 passes right in the middle of the mysterious drawings, but from land, it is impossible to understand their true aspect. At first, only stones are visible, furrows which are not that deep, and clear spaces with different colors and undefined shapes. From the tower, 14 meters high, visibility improves only a little, yet over 200 drawings and almost 13,000 geometric figures are spread over its entire expansion. Only from above is it possible to realize the true essence of the shapes traced on the ground. The Nazca Plain is one of the planet's driest and most inhospitable. In fact, rainfall only amounts to 1 cubic centimeter per year, more or less a quarter of an hour of rain over a 12-month span. A real hellish, barren and stony land, but at the same time, the ideal place to trace images which can remain unchanged throughout the centuries.
These lands are quite unique. After penetrating the pampas and walking over them, you realize that even in 100 years' time, the same tracks will still be here because they are formed by a layer of ferrous stones which reflect the heat during the day, forming a vortex of hot air which does not allow sand to deposit, but moves it to the side. These stones are superficial, brown, and if trodden upon, you find that the white earth emerges, thus remaining permanently exposed. That's why these lines have kept visible all these centuries.
An ideal land to preserve the geometric figures in time, but it doesn't explain how the ancient inhabitants of the area, the Nazca, could draw them and trace kilometric lines, most of which are only visible from the sky.
Many drawings can easily be observed from the hilltops or mountains which surround the desert. Others, definitely big, cannot be seen from these heights. It is extremely hard, and since they can be observed as a whole only from above, the question is, how have they been created? We don't know. It's a mystery.
Hence, as Professor Adzabake claims, in order to have an overview of the larger drawings and direct the creative work, an overview was necessary and achievable only from the height of a sufficiently high hill. But on the plain, there aren't any. Therefore, that only leaves flight. But who had the capacity to fly over this plain centuries ago? The oral tradition of the Nazca speaks clearly. The Viracochas. The figures have been drawn with an accuracy which has baffled researchers who have examined them. The zoomorphic drawings have been traced with one continuous line, meaning with a technique which is even more difficult in terms of lines and geometries. One would think these are more recent, as they are more sophisticated, but on the contrary, they are more ancient. Therefore, the logic which states that human progress grows in time fails with the regression of technical capacity. How can this be explained? Perhaps the inhabitants of the plain ran out of crucial technical support. Oral tradition helps by reporting that suddenly the Viracachas left for an unknown destination. Could this be the right explanation? When they left, the Nazca found it impossible to trace other zoomorphic figures. So they were limited to continue drawing easier lines and geometric figures. Only in modern times did man understand what had been drawn in the Nazca Plain. An era when man had realized his ancient dream, to fly. The first to discover the true nature of the inexplicable furrows traced on the ground was the American geographer Paul Kosok in 1939, while he flew over the area with light aircraft. He tried to discover the mystery, guessing it was an astronomic calendar. But the most famous researcher who tried to unveil the mystery behind these lines was Maria Reiche, a German. The scholar, affectionately called the Lady of the Pampas, also fought hard to safeguard this extraordinary site, managing to have it proclaimed Patrimony of Humanity by UNESCO. In the city of Nazca, an association and a museum have been named after her. Her grave is in the garden of the museum.
It was an order by Mary to bury her body in a tomb which we keep in this museum. She wanted to be part of this area, feel surrounded and safeguarded by these lines and drawings.
Reiche dedicated her life to studying the drawings of the plain, starting in 1949, a passion which kept her going till the very end, in 1998, the year she died. Her conjecture is amongst those most highly esteemed.
There are many conjectures, but the most widely embraced is that by German doctor Maria Reich, who claims it is a large astronomic calendar used for agriculture.
Victoria Nikitsky lives in the town of Nazca and knew Reiche during the last years of her life, when the scholar had become blind and paralyzed in her bed. She writes promotional material on the drawings in the Nazca Plain and illustrates to tourists the wonderful work carried out by Maria Reiche by means of a simple plastic model.
The spider and the monkey are directly linked to the Big Dipper constellation in the case of the monkey, and to the Orion constellation in the case of the spider. Both are connected to the summer solstice. This was how it was possible to forecast rainfalls.
A huge astronomic calendar. Is this the answer? But was such complexity really necessary only to achieve an astronomic calendar which, amongst other things, could be realized in a less colossal and laborious size? An astronomic calendar for agricultural use also surely had to be completed quickly for survival. But archaeologists speak of 1,500 years for its creation. In addition, why realize such a mammoth work which could only be seen from the sky, in flight? Without this capacity, the great majority of signs traced on the ground becomes inexplicable and therefore useless. Finally, many drawings, if subjected to computer inspections, find no astronomical reference whatsoever. Therefore, Reiche's studies only partially unveil the Pampas mystery. And the enigmatic figure traced on the side of a small hill seems to look and salute someone in flight. But who flew in the distant past? A plot which thickens even more over the past few years with the discovery of other drawings and geometric figures in the close-by Palpa plain. The style is similar to the Nazca, but these date further back in time and are still only comprehensible from above, in flight. Finally, the Nazca and Palpa drawings cover a total area of nearly 600 square kilometers, and, to be created, thousands of tons of stones were shifted. Only a very important reason could justify any activity of this magnitude.